I'm Mary Shedden. I've been news director at WUSF since about 2015. And I've been a longtime resident of the area. To my wonderful guest here is a dear friend, I can say, has become a dear friend, and it is Megan Borowski, and Megan is the senior meteorologist at the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. That is a mouthful.
Yes.
How fast can you say it?
Pretty quickly, Florida Public Radio Emergency Network.
There we go. Okay.
Jam it into the end of all the radio hits.
Yes, it is, and you'll hear me probably slip into saying a phrase called FPREN. Mm-hmm. That's our code, so we don't have to say Florida Public Radio Emergency Network in-house. But we're here to talk about we don't have a green screen, we're not bringing computer models, we're having a conversation about the work we do, but also some of the things that you can think about as this year is underway, this hurricane season is underway. And Megan, I wanted to start with a little context. 2024, it was a heck of a year. Mm-hmm. And I'm sliding back a little so I can see you a little better. 2024, there were 18 named storms. 11 of them were hurricanes. 3 of them we will not forget. Debbie, Helene, and Milton. Mm-hmm. Changed our region forever. All of those will never leave our hearts or minds, and it's on our minds a lot right now, I'm sure. 2025 is predicted to be an above average year. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
So when we're talking about seasonal forecasting, we're early in the season, or we even have these forecasts come out as early as April. We're only looking at the number of storms. So the number of named storms, the number of hurricanes, and the number of major hurricanes. So this year we're looking at anywhere from 6 to 10 hurricanes, 3 to 5 of which actually could be major hurricanes. A normal year would be 7 hurricanes, 3 of which are major. And that's pretty much it's an average of the past 30 years. So what we're looking at compared to average for now is the period between 1991 and 2020. So we look at all the hurricane seasons in those years, and we average the total number of named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes. So that's what we're comparing this forecast to.
It's just an equation. I never knew that.
Everything in meteorology is an equation.
Yes. So really, it's a prediction. It's not, as in anything, you can't be certain what's going to happen.
Well, and the thing too that we like to point out is the seasonal predictions are just numbers of totals. It does not tell us if we think a storm is, which storms are going to make landfall, if any storms are going to make landfall in the contiguous United States. It doesn't tell us when we expect storms to occur. We see that we have a very late start to season. We don't have a named storm yet. This is, I think, the latest in over a decade. Don't quote me on that. But so these seasonal forecasts, again, take the season as a whole, June 1st to November 30th. It doesn't tell us track of storm, intensity of storm, timing. Those are all things to keep in mind. Also, as we see, we can have a below average season, but if that one storm impacts our neighborhood, well then for us it's a really catastrophic season. So something else to think about, to not let the numbers get in your head of, it's going to be above average and I need to panic, or it's forecasted to be below average. I can just not think about it.
Right. So today, I mentioned how I consider Megan a dear friend because for the past 10 years,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Almost 10 years.
Yeah.
We have literally worked together side by side remotely with you at the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network in Gainesville, myself at the WUSF studios in Tampa, working throughout hurricane season and really throughout the year about extreme weather. And we kind of break up hurricane season thoughts and conversations in 3 ways: before, during, and after. And so I thought I'd kind of shape our conversation that way because it's kind of I think getting a peek behind the scenes helps you understand how we're thinking, the kind of stories we're telling, the kind of reports that Megan and her team are filing. So first, it's hurricane season. What's a typical day look like for you?
Well, every day starts off with looking at the atmosphere. So this is now my 7th season with FPREN. It feels like 7 years though, compared with the past very active seasons we've had. But I start off my shift, I have the morning shift, so I'll start off looking at data of what's going on currently in the environment. So really hurricane season for me is the same as during the off season. I'll look at satellite imagery, I'll look at radar imagery, I'll look at temperature observations, the wind observations from weather balloons, trying to get an idea of what the pattern looks like over the state, because we do forecasting for the entire state of Florida every day. And so if there's a severe weather outbreak that we're tracking, I need to, be looking at where do we think the storms are going to line up. But for tropical meteorology in particular, we look as far east as Africa, and we look at the thunderstorm activity in sub-Saharan Africa to see, okay, do we think there's going to be any disturbances that eject off the west coast of Africa into the eastern Atlantic? Are conditions over the Atlantic conducive for development? We'll look at sea surface temperature profiles throughout the entire Atlantic Ocean, including into the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, just getting an idea of what conditions are like. Are they favorable to enhance thunderstorm development? And then also we kind of have our looking glass out to see if there's any disturbances that could start to develop into a tropical cyclone.
So during hurricane season, it's not much difference, and you're not looking at the coast of Africa, the western coast, and saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. You're not freaking out, you're not worrying about it, and you probably see plenty of social media and such of people going, oh no, it's time to worry. Our friends here today, what would you like to say about when it's out in the Atlantic and 7 days out, 10 days out could develop? What do you hope people are thinking about when they hear this?
Well, the beauty is, at least with hurricanes, is that we have time to prepare and time to iron out the forecast and know when impacts are going to be coming, as opposed to something like a severe thunderstorm or a tornado where the warning time is not nearly as large. When a storm isn't even in existence yet, I would not worry too much. I always say be prepared as you go into season. Understand the vulnerabilities of your property and your family and be prepared to take action if you need to. I would warn folks against the hype on social media. It's extremely frustrating to see somebody post one model run and forecast.
One model run. English.
One.
Translate.
So we watch weather models. They're computer models. They perform mathematical equations, and they pump out what they think, given the current state of the atmosphere, what they think will happen as you go farther out in time. And we know models have biases. They're going to give us a forecast that's probably not correct. And so in school, we're trained to kind of identify what those biases are and then identify when we need to be taking the model seriously.
So that's when we see the spaghetti model. Those are all the different models.
So that's one graphical depiction of the models. But yeah, you're correct with that. But even toward the start of the season, I think it was toward the end of May, started to see chatter on social media of like June 12th, Category 5 hurricane hitting the Florida Peninsula. And of course that didn't happen, right? But you can see a model showing that and you can get really freaked out. And we have 6 months of hurricane seasons to get through. And if we're posting information or if somebody's posting information every time a model shows a hurricane crashing into the shore, it's gonna be a long season. But meteorologists we're trained and we see it all the time of when to take heed in what the model is kind of hinting at and when to be like, that's something not to worry about right now. I would say anything beyond 5 days out from right now, if you see a model saying, okay, in 10 days you're gonna have a hurricane, that's, yeah, maybe it could happen, but it's luck if the model gets it at that point.
So I did not plan that, but let's talk about 5 days out.
Okay. Perfect transition.
Next up, and this is really where it gets serious. Mm-hmm. And so every day the folks from FPREN are sending us updates. We have what's called a Slack channel, emails, we get information, we get maps, we get a lot of stuff. But when it's starting to get serious, about 5 days out, what happens is your team says, we need to start having calls, and we all get on Zoom, and we have been doing this for
Years.
And we all get on, and it's all the member stations across Florida, from Key West up to Pensacola to Jacksonville, and we are on these calls and describe what the calls are like. And this is 5 days out. It's kind of like you give a little, they give us a little peek so that different newsrooms can get an idea that it might be more serious for their area.
Yeah, so we'll start off each call kind of showing everybody, and I think it's important to show the imagery of what we're watching. You know, it might just be a clump of thunderstorms on satellite imagery, but showing everybody what we're looking at, the information that we have right now, and then what we think is going to happen. You know, as we know, the forecast track of a storm gets better as you get closer to impacts. We saw the wobble with Ian, we saw the wobble with Milton. And so it's almost like steering a ship or an airplane, trying to get the track 100% correct. But 5 days out, we have a broad picture of broad impacts of what we think will happen across a particular region. We don't have the pinpoint details down yet, but we start talking about what areas do we think are going to be impacted. So, you know, for Milton, we were looking at GCU to our south, and then also WUSF here in the Tampa Bay area, and kind of alerting those stations that we think are going to be impacted. Hey, we think that you're going to need all hands on deck, and also we will be all hands on deck to provide wall-to-wall coverage for the duration of the event and even afterward. So that's 5 days out. It's kind of a 30,000-foot view of details are probably going to change, but here's what we're looking at right now.
Right. So when that happens at WUSF, we will then kind of activate a plan we have in place for any kind of emergency coverage. We have teams where we say, okay, you're going to be, we have an A team that's going to be in studio throughout the duration of a storm. There are people who are going to be the relief to come in and fill in. We have people who evacuate and go somewhere else, and they help especially with digital work, and we start implementing that plan. And one of the things we actually do is we give time to our employees, especially those going to be in studio, time to board up their homes, getting their families off. We have folks who have small children, have pets. All these things they have to take care of before a storm happens. We're members of the community too. I think I was telling you, my husband works for Hillsborough County, so he works in a shelter. So we've got to close up the shop and head on into work. So that's one thing we're doing, but we're also preparing coverage. And one of the first things you almost always see, sandbags. Right? Sandbag centers being open. By the way, most counties have them open now. Get your sandbags now. I think that's brilliant. I love that multiple counties are doing that. But we are putting out things like information you need to know about sandbags. We don't want to do the alarmist, we're going to the Home Depot and it's cleaned out of plywood. Yeah. It's a great visual, but what's it telling you? We're doing more things like closures, places where, starting to share shelter information, talking to FPREN, to Florida Public Radio Emergency Network, and talking to Megan and saying, it's looking like it's coming here. What are some of the things? And you say things like storm surge, winds, flooding. And so it gives you that information. So 5 days out, those are the things we're really looking at. One thing I learned in those 5 days out is there are a bunch of updates throughout the day. But there are some that are more important than others. 5 and 8, or no, 8 and 11? 11 and 8, 11 and 5?
Well, it changes when we go from standard time to daylight time, which that always gets me as well. Yes. But the National Hurricane Center puts out a new update every 3 hours when there's a named storm, every 6 hours when they're just monitoring the tropics. I think it's 2 and 8, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. 2, 8, 11. but don't quote me on that. We've
Yeah.
not had a storm yet this season. But yeah, so every 3 hours we will be looking at the newest data coming in on the storm itself. So that's maximum sustained winds, pressure. Of course, when you see the winds go up, the pressure is going to be dropping. That means you have a storm that's intensifying. But there's also additional nuggets of information that I particularly like to look at, which includes the maximum radius of hurricane force winds and tropical storm force winds. Because every storm is different. You might have a very compact storm, but you could have a storm that has hurricane force winds or tropical storm force winds extend hundreds of miles from the center, which is important because if you have a storm like Helene that's tracking offshore and over the Gulf and then eventually making landfall with a big bend, but staying offshore Tampa, you can still have those winds impacting the land. And you have the storm surge issue as well. But yes, we get those updates from the National Hurricane Center, which gives us a wealth of knowledge, and it also helps us to better communicate the risks to the public.
Yeah. And when you're watching, I am curious, I've never asked you this, when you're watching us on Zoom, one of the things that you will see is in these calls, so they will lead, the meteorologists lead the call and they'll say, okay, let's start with Miami. And they basically geographically ask every station moving up the state, what questions do you have? What have we not covered? And so something that affects, Southeast Florida could be very different. Our friends in Fort Myers, we usually have many of the same questions because we're both in that target. But what's it like to see the questions coming from these different communities, knowing that we're trying to prepare for that? Is it because I think it sounds kind of wild to hear it.
I will say prepping for hurricane coverage is a very sobering event, and unfortunately we've had to go through it many, many times these past 3 seasons in particular. For me, I want to provide as much information as possible for each of our communities. So at FPREN, it's almost like we are the meteorologists for every single public media station, and so you want to provide the details and be there for those neighborhoods. So for me, I take it very seriously. It's very, sobering, and I am, I don't want to say I get a pit in my stomach, but I start to get a little emotional because it's, especially, when we were forecasting Ian and when we were forecasting Milton, because, we have these highly populated areas that that I know are going to get impacted. And knowing kind of an idea of what the aftermath pictures are going to be like, it is very emotional. And so I am on. I don't get much sleep when we're preparing, and it's a full week of preparation and recovery. I don't get much sleep, but, I know it's important, even if we can just get information out to save one life, during the storm coverage, that's good enough for me, where it's like, okay, this, I need to be on, I need to be focused all the time.
Yeah. I will say it's an incredible blessing also to have meteorologists because we can focus on the other information you need, like power outages, things like that. We're not trying to forecast. I mean, we have some, everybody here, if I say Dennis Phillips, we all know who Dennis Phillips is. Everybody knows Dennis Phillips. And he does a great job. And meteorologists are a gift. And I will say, Megan and her colleagues, starting at 5 a.m., they'll say, okay, what stations want extra information? And Megan will get on the line and talk directly with our Morning Edition host or somebody else so that we are getting more information. And that is a real gift. And so thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about 1 to 2 days out. We're more focused, preparing information. We're more specific. In those, these are the times when people are saying, you need to evacuate now.
We've got a third participant here, Mary.
Not a meteorologist. Off the stage. But these are the times where we start shifting into what's called phase. We have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And the folks at FPREN, we kind of collectively say it, but when do you need more coverage?
Yeah.
Can you explain the phases?
Right, so phase 3 coverage is kind of like our normal operation with maybe a little bit of extra coverage, and this is where we'll provide content. And mind you, it's a staff of 4 meteorologists, and we're covering weather for the entire state. So testament to the team. We're doing a heck of a job. But we'll provide additional coverage for morning edition and all things considered in the afternoon, and sometimes the new newscast if stations request it. But we'll provide additional audio bites, and we'll also provide, if anybody requests it, interviews. So we'll get on the zips and we'll do talkback interviews with any hosts around the state, just to provide additional answers to maybe location-specific questions. Once we get to phase 2, that is our live storm coverage, and we'll be providing updates about the storm at the top of the hour, and then we provide a bottom. So top of the hour would be like, I think we're at 04 past.
Yes. So the NPR newscast starts at 01. So you're looking at a clock straight up 1 minute after the hour. The NPR newscast starts. It can go to 06 or 07. At 04, stations at 4 minutes after, stations have the option of doing a local newscast. It's at that time we hand off to FPREN.
So we'll cut in and we'll broadcast to any station that decides to pick it up, and we'll provide updates on the storm. So typically I like to do a current overview of the statistics of the storm. Now each member on my team is different, but for me, I give the statistics of the storm, what's currently happening, where do I see particular cells within the storm that I'm watching, maybe for tornadoes, if we're having those outer bands move on shore, and then forecast for the next 12 to 24 hours. What do we expect? Where is this storm going to go? What are the biggest impacts, and what is the timing? I think those are the two big things that I like to hit: impacts, the location and the intensity of the impacts, and the timing. When is it going to come and when is it going to leave? So that's phase 2. And then at 30 minutes past the hour, we'll provide an additional 30-second update.
Mm-hmm.
That's for something more like maybe a storm that is approaching, not making landfall yet, still on its way, or something like a tropical storm that isn't producing very, very intense impacts. Once we get to phase 1, that is our wall-to-wall coverage, where we will be in the studios, and our home for FPREN is the studio of WUFT up in Gainesville at the University of Florida. And so we'll be in the studio there, all around we've got a little radio island, we like to call it, with a bunch of microphones and then the soundboard right in the center. And we will be sitting down there. I'll probably have about 3 screens up in front of me, each with different data sets coming in. And that's where we talk about the storm. That is storm tracking the entire way.
And you are on, so the coverage, we have a similar setup at WUSF, and we have between the two of us, our station is providing around-the-clock coverage. Mm-hmm. So you're spending about 20 minutes every hour providing meteorological information, detailed information about the status of the storm, where it's at. By the way, we're on radio.
Yeah.
And so you really have to describe it.
Absolutely, yes.
And then the other 25 minutes of the hour comes from WUSF. And so we have a rotation of 3 anchors who take 2-hour shifts, and a producer and an engineer. And every 2 hours, they're sitting in that chair for 2 hours. They get a rest. They don't get to sleep. They get to sleep occasionally, but no one sleeps more than 2 hours. And we do that until it ends. So for Helene, Helene and Milton, I believe, between 13 and 15 hours in the studio live. And it was a team of about 12 people in the newsroom, our incredible engineers. Our digital team we were pumping out not just digital information, radio information, which is vital when the power goes out, mm-hmm. but also social media. And you're such a key part of it. I was telling you we will take some of the things that Megan says in those little live hits, we'll put it on an Instagram post, and 10,000 people will be informed that maybe didn't even have a radio, but they saw it online, so they had that information. That's what we're doing around the clock, and yeah. It's intense, but it's probably the work I'm most proud of.
Yeah, once we go into phase 1 coverage, we like to call it a marathon, but for me, time goes like that. I mean, it is amazing the amount of information that we are getting in from National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, Storm Prediction Center, Weather Prediction Center, getting all of that information in, plus from emergency managers, filtering that, getting ready to have conversations for 20 minutes throughout the hour, and then we're also writing digital stories in that mm-hmm. time. We're producing audio content that we're recording and sending out to stations. We're producing social media content that we're posting on our Florida Storms account. And we also partner with PBS television stations across the state of Florida. So we're also producing videos.
Right. And Facebook Live.
And Facebook Lives, all while we are doing that round-the-clock coverage for the radio. And so we are trying to maximize our output so we can reach audiences wherever we can, because the whole focus, is getting information out there.
I think one thing that we're very aware of is people without access, without electricity. Radio is about the only thing you have. And so many of us are connected to our smartphones or the internet in some way. And we are working really hard to make sure that the radio has as much information as possible. Personally, I was without power for 5 days after Milton. I know what that feels like. And we are trying to make sure that we get that information to you. We also know that a lot of people have evacuated, and if you've ever experienced and evacuated on I-75, you know what I'm talking about. And those people are they may be safe, and they may not be local, but they're just as worried about their homes as we are when we're here. So how do you stay focused on weather then?
During a storm? Or?
Yeah, during the storm. Do you just block everything else
I do
out?
try to block everything else out. I mean, we all live in Florida, and so I get worried too. And it's kind of hard not to think about, what's going on at my house, or, is everybody safe? But I don't know. Yeah, once I'm in the studio, it's my shift, which is pretty much until the storm is over. I try to just think about the mission. What is the mission of FPREN? What is the mission of my job? And that's what I'm here to do. That's what I was hired to do. And that and coffee, I think.
Coffee is key. Coffee is key.
Yep.
We ran out of coffee during, I think, right after
not
Ian.
Good.
There were people openly weeping.
Yeah, it's the little things, but
Yes.
it definitely that helps keep things going.
Yes. So after storms, I think last year, probably the toughest lesson that we all learned is when a storm passes. First of all, as you mentioned, Helene did not hit, the eye of Helene did not hit our area. But my gosh, it devastated so many of us. And the word storm surge and flooding, and it's not just in those few hours after a storm, it goes on and on. Can you tell me a little about how you're thinking? Eyewall has passed, it's dissipating. You're almost relieved, you are relieved that that's happening, but the floods are coming, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and of course it's different for each storm, right? But we saw, I think it was Helene and Debbie as well, very heavy rainfall over central Florida. And all that rain is going to run off, and it's got to go somewhere, and it's going to go down the rivers. And so even though the wind threat might have subsided, or the storm surge threat might have subsided, you can still have freshwater flooding that impacts our area, which we saw. So I think about that. My mind now goes, once the storm has passed, to okay, let's look at river gauges. Let's look at what's coming out from the local EMs of dam levels, and are they going to be releasing dams and things of that nature. And I try to talk about that when we are live. When the storm is starting to die down a little bit, saying, okay, the risk isn't totally over yet. Of course, if there's no risk, then I'll say that. But typically speaking, we saw it in Lakeland. Actually, the water was rising, and it's blue skies, and everybody's like, what's going on? I try to see what is actually going on when the storm's happening, who's getting the most rainfall, and then predicting the hydrologic flow of where the freshwater runoff is going to go.
Yeah, I think flood gauges, the river gauges have become something I am intensely paying attention to. It's probably the thing that I worry about most, because so many people think it's not going to happen. And because there is that just physical release of,
is it over yet?
Yeah, and the dark and the rain and the winds, and you feel that release, but yet this wonderful, wonderful place we're sitting in experienced that with 4 feet of water, and so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so how can someone pay attention? Because I think meteorologists are telling that story, but how can somebody be empowered to pay attention in their own way to river gauges. You know, the Alafaya, the Hillsborough.
Well, I mean, the USGS has a great website and great resources where they actually have plotted, and you can click on the map.
That's the Geological Service?
Yeah, the U.S. Geological Service. You can actually click on the map and see the different river gauges. And what it shows you is the past record of over the past, I don't know what it is, it might be 24 hours of where the river level has been, where the river level currently is, and then the prediction of what the river level is going to be in the future. And it has a nice color code on it as well, of, you know, if it's going to be in flood stage or above flood stage. So that's something to think about, you know, maybe checking out if you're so inclined to do so. You know, WUSF will have stories on, we'll post stories that they'll air of the risk of river flooding. And I would also check out, I think it's ready.gov, and then also Florida CERT, their website will have a Know Your Zone map.
That's FLSERT. Yeah.
You can kind of see if you live in a flood zone, so either for freshwater flooding or storm surge. And you know, that can be helpful to check out that resource. I think most of us, if we've been on our properties for a while, we kind of know our vulnerabilities. But also, you know, there's a lot of transplants that are arriving to Florida and may not know. So it takes about 5 minutes to look and peruse these websites just to give you an extra level of knowledge of, okay, I live in a flood zone, I might need to think about evacuating.
And even if you don't, I think one of the big things we're hearing from homeowners is they were told, oh, you don't have to buy flood insurance. But I hear you.
You might want
to
it.
get it anyway. And so
Yeah.
I think that's one of the big lessons. I know we at WUSF are trying to help remind people that, you know, whether or not you're in a flood zone, the storms, because the rain is coming harder, it is coming in a different way, and the intensity of it can truly have a profound impact that we may not have seen before.
And the thing too that you also want to think about is, don't just take the intensity of the storm and be like, okay, it's just a tropical storm, I'm going to be fine. Because we've seen many times tropical storms dump feet worth of rainfall over a particular area. We saw Helene was an extratropical cyclone at that point in the mountains of the Carolinas, dump a tremendous amount of rainfall. So don't think that if a storm is a quote-unquote weak storm, that you might not have catastrophic impacts. I don't like the, you know, I understand we have the Saffir-Simpson scale to classify storms, and it's important to have for ease of communication. But it also, unfortunately, has kind of created this approach, I think, and I fall victim to it too, where, oh, it's just a tropical storm. It's never just a tropical storm, or it's never just, you know, a Cat 4 or a Cat 5. Take each storm seriously, because each storm is different.
So are you saying you're a cone of uncertainty hater?
No, those are two different things. And actually, they're trying to narrow down the cone. They've done a great job at the National Hurricane Center. But that's another great point that I want to bring up again, is the cone does not show where impacts are going to be confined to. It's showing where, based on the models, where there's a 66% chance that the center will track somewhere within that cone, but there's a 33% chance that the center could track outside of the cone. So it's all mathematics and statistical modeling. But, you know, impacts can range hundreds of miles from the center of the storm. So even if you have a storm that falls smack dab right on the track that the NHC puts out as a forecast, you're still going to have impacts from the center. So something really to keep in mind. Another example, you know, of that is Southeast Florida, not in the cone, not right in the track of Milton, and we had catastrophic tornadoes on the East Coast.
True.
So, you know, impacts are not confined to the cone or to the center, so always think about that.
I will say on WUSF.org we have a great hurricane guide. I depend on it myself, but also we are using maps from the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network that are updated all the time. And while you may miss, you know, Dennis's latest update on TV, you can go and you can look at those maps. One of my favorite is tropical storm wind expectations and when, and it kind of, it's a grounding. Those maps are very grounding for me. You've used the word sobering, and I think sobering is the whole thing, but they kind of go, okay, this is what I can expect. And so I highly recommend those maps. Is there anything I've forgotten to ask you? Because I'm about to hand over the microphone to these guys.
Well, I am going to plug the Florida Storms app as well.
Yes, and you should.
If you go on iOS or Google Play, we have an app called Florida Storms. It's hosted by the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. We've got a radar map. You could do, yep, there it is. And also, cool thing about it is we have, you can, if you enable your location, it will geolocate you to a certain degree and identify that you're in the WUSF market. And you can actually stream WUSF's broadcast right in the app, which is great.
Yes, it is, and it's an incredible thing, and there's no rain right now. We're good, I just looked. My wonderful colleague, Megan Bowman, who is part of our Your Florida team, she is going to have a microphone, and if you have a question, if you want to just raise your hands, and we're going to try to keep it to general questions. Some things we may not be able to answer, but we'll do our best. Yes, and if you could say what town you're from. Otherwise, we're all the community of Ruskin at this moment.
Greetings, Dennis Franz from Sun City Center. My question is, how much do you depend on artificial intelligence in your predictive models? And are what you're telling me, your predictions already using it? Or do you see a future that could enhance your forecast?
That's a great question. I am not at this current moment using the AI models, but I will say Google just released their one of their AI models, and I noticed a couple things. It did pretty well. What they did is they put in past data from last year before storms developed, and the model did pretty well at predicting, I think it was Helene, Milton, and Debbie. But what it did not capture was the rapid intensification of Milton. And I believe of Beryl as well. That was our early season storm last year. So in terms of track, I've noticed the model is pretty good, but it's still having trouble with rapid intensification. So right now I might look at the model just to see what is it thinking. I would not just say, okay, this is what Google AI says, that's what's going to happen. I think down the line, AI in predictive modeling is going to get better, and we'll see it maybe have a better grasp on rapid intensification. I will say that part of meteorology is also pattern recognition on the human's part. And I've noticed that the National Hurricane Center meteorologists do very well at capturing rapid intensification where the computers do not yet. But to answer your question, I do think in the future that we're going to see a new era of weather models that will, incorporate artificial intelligence in modeling. We're not 100% there yet, but down the line, it will be an extra tool that we use. It's not the only tool, and that's something to remember, is that models are not the only tool we use, but I think it'll be very helpful.
Great.
I'm a third generation Floridian, and I've been through more hurricanes than I care to remember. But in the Tampa Bay area, they lead a very, very charmed life. Mm-hmm. And the last major hurricane to hit that area, which would be a Cat 3 or above, was in 1921. And I don't remember the name of that storm to save my grandma's life, but it's just something about it. Places you wouldn't say that in the Panhandle or on the East Coast up Jacksonville and all that sort of stuff. But here they just, remember Charlie, we go right up there and then it went, pow! Yeah, it's 90 degrees, I think there were skid marks in the Gulf. Yeah. And the forecasters were up there, they were just miffed because it didn't hit. This is their home.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was so funny, but it just went right by. But there's something, I don't know what it is.
Well, we've actually asked you that question a couple of times, is what is it about the Tampa Bay geography, for better or for worse? What is the reality of the Bay? So much is exposed to water, but yet it does seem protected.
Well, it seems like I've been saying that Tampa has lucked out prodigiously over the past couple of years because we thought that Ian was going to, early on we thought Ian was going to make landfall, somewhere near Treasure Island or in Tampa, St. Pete. And then this past year, I remember seeing the first couple of forecast tracks come out from NHC for Milton, and again, it was Tampa's in the bullseye. I will tell you that the steering for hurricanes in the atmosphere, it depends on how intense the storm itself is, of which winds, like at what level of the atmosphere the winds actually can help guide the storm itself. Ultimately, though, of why Tampa has been protected, I don't have an answer. Luck, maybe. I will say, it's been a very, very long time, and so,
Well,
hopefully this isn't the year, but I wouldn't let your guard down, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think with Helene, I think that was a sobering lesson because the storm didn't hit, but it was catastrophic in the damage that it did do to our homes and our communities.
Right.
And that was surge?
Yeah, that was surge. I was gonna mention that a little bit. Again, you don't need a landfalling storm in your backyard to create a catastrophe. Because of the little opening of you have the Hillsborough Bay and the Tampa Bay, and then you've got the opening into the Gulf. You need a storm that makes landfall near or just north of Tampa Bay to really have that funneling fishbowl effect, to have all of that surge go into both bays. And luckily, Ian and Milton both made landfall to the south, and so you actually had offshore winds. And during the bay, you had the images from the newscasters coming out of, oh boy, I'm on Bayshore Boulevard and people are walking down onto the into where the water should be. So the geography there, it's got to be a very sweet spot of the storm, either nearby or just to the north, in order to kind of maximize that storm surge potential. Of course, the stronger the storm itself, you're going to have stronger winds. That's going to be like a stronger bulldozer, so to speak, bringing those waters inland. And think again, it's kind of like you need a pinpoint precision to get that to happen. So hopefully it doesn't happen this year. Hopefully it doesn't ever happen again. But I always err on the side of caution of being prepared for it to happen. Right. That way, if that once in a lifetime event does happen, you are impacted, in a very minor way compared to if you're not prepared.
Right.
Questions? So I'm from Michigan, and I remember lots of tornadoes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm confused about what happens with the hurricane that causes the tornadoes. Which comes first?
Well, so it's all about the structure of the storm itself. So typically speaking, you could get a tornado on any portion or location within the hurricane itself, but typically we'll see the highest concentration in the right front quadrant of the storm. So if you think of the hurricane as a circle, it's going to be that first quadrant between 1 and 3 relative to storm motion. And it's all about the rotation of the hurricane itself, counterclockwise rotation, forward speed of the hurricane itself, kind of helping to get those thunderstorms in the outer bands rotating. You need rotation of those thunderstorms to have the potential for tornadoes. And we saw that with Milton as the hurricane itself was tracking northward into the Gulf. We had outer bands wrapping from southwest to northeast into southeast Florida. And you've got thunderstorms already in place. You've got a very humid air mass in place. You've got the rotation now coming into play with the thunderstorms. We had some pretty strong tornadoes. We were tracking with, I think it was it was out of Fort Pierce. We were tracking with that station. Mm-hmm. Really wedge-like tornadoes tracking up I-95 and into Port St. Lucie. It was remarkable. My jaw was on the floor because I was seeing images of what I would see with storm chasers out of the Midwest.
Well, and I was going to ask that for those of us who are third-generation Floridians,
mm-hmm.
when we hear about Tornado Alley in the Midwest, is it a different kind of system, or is it still that rotational?
So it's, the physics for tornado formation are still the same, as you need to have a thunderstorm, and then you need to get the thunderstorm to rotate, and then it could spawn a tornado. In the Midwest, you'll see, a very humid air mass being brought northward, a humid air mass from the Gulf being brought northward, and then you have very dry air from New Mexico and Arizona shifting eastward, and you have this clash of air masses where you'll get either discrete or just like singular supercells, we like to call them, that's the technical term, or you'll get a squall line, like you'll see along a cold front develop, and then you can get damaging straight line winds. With a tropical system, it kind of looks the same. I mean, if you just took one of those cells out and plopped it in the Midwest, that's what it would be like, sort of. But with the tropical system, you'll kind of have a line of stronger thunderstorms, and a couple of them could gain rotation. Overall, if you break it down, the general idea is the same, but the physics are a little different, because with a tropical system, you're dealing with a warm core cyclone as opposed to out west. I know I'm throwing a lot of technical terms out there.
You're starting to scare me.
I know. Just know that ultimately the weather that is produced by these thunderstorms is the same. It's just as dangerous. So tornadoes are the same on the ground in Florida as in the Midwest. They are dangerous. You need to get inside.
This is a total tangent.
Sure.
When did you decide you wanted to become a meteorologist?
It's the quintessential, every Met has pretty much the same story. You're yay big, you're like 2-3 years old, and you see a thunderstorm. I'm originally from up north, but my mom went to school down here. We would come down to Florida very frequently, and seeing thunderstorms, summer thunderstorms coming in, from the Gulf along the sea breeze, just watching them, it's just amazing. I don't know, it's amazing in my opinion, how nature is trying to find equilibrium or peace, and out of trying to get back to that equilibrium, it creates chaos with the weather. And I think that dichotomy is just so cool, and that's why I love it. So, but I was very small when I decided I wanted to be a Met.
And your passion is so clear, and I'm so glad I got to learn that about you today.
Thank you.
One more question.
Adam from St. Pete. Just had a question. What is it about the west coast of Africa that every year we know that hurricane season's happening?
So there's the West African monsoon. So just south of the Sahara Desert, there's an area called the Intertropical Convergence Zone. It's where you have winds near the equator that start to converge. And so you'll get thunderstorms that you see start to pop up during the summertime months. There's also thunderstorms associated with another climatological signal called the Madden-Julian oscillation. I won't get into that. But what happens is you'll have thunderstorms over sub-Saharan Africa, and those tend to create disturbances in the atmosphere. And you have to think of it as almost like creating waves, or like a ripple in a pond. And so you have storms start to trigger over Africa, which creates a ripple of a disturbance propagating westward toward the coast of Africa. And if conditions are right and they're supportive of thunderstorms, you can have almost like a ripple continuing to go and go and go and go and go. Once the wave gets over the water, if you have very warm waters, that's fuel. So you can have these storms start to multiply. So, and I've got a GIF saved to my computer that I love watching. It's of Hurricane Ian. But it's a satellite that follows Ian as it develops. And you can see just a couple of clusters of thunderstorms come off the African coast. It's over warm waters. You have, as it's tracking over the Atlantic, it's kind of dismal, but you still have something of organization. And then it hits the really warm waters of the Caribbean, and it just explodes. And it's just quite remarkable watching the disturbance stay alive, and then all of a sudden start to get the rotation. You see the higher cloud tops. And then you can clearly see the rapid intensification, the eye wall replacement, and then landfall. But with the African thunderstorms, it's all you just need, like the first tick to get a domino to start falling, and then it's a chain reaction.
Wow. Megan Borowski, Megan Bowman's back there. Megan Borowski, senior meteorologist with the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. It has been a joy.
Thank you for having me.
Talking to you. Thank you. Most importantly, thank you all for being here today. Please, I hope all of you have a battery-powered radio, because WUSF is ready to serve you no matter what happens. 89.7 for WUSF, classical WSMR. When it gets serious, we start simulcasting there, and that's at 89.1. WUSF.org, and also on your favorite social media channels. Thank you, thank you.